Right, okay, let's see. Good afternoon, everyone on YouTube and Facebook. If you're watching, just bear with me a few moments. And actually, while you're waiting on me, you can, if you're on Facebook, then do feel free to tag in someone else into this. It's probably going to be a lengthy one today, actually. So if you're not able to stay for all of it, no problem, because we're going to have the replay here. So just hold on. Right, okay. Right, so here is the formal introduction. Good afternoon. Welcome to Round the Table. This is a session that is brought to you by Kingdom Life Ministries. It's our conversation forum. It's where we take topics that are just sort of like close to our heart and also close to yours as well, that we want to be able to discuss openly. It's something that we decided to do because we find that particularly as Christians, there's a lot of different issues, a lot of different niggly questions that are in our minds, and we don't often necessarily feel that we've got the forums, the platforms, even the connections sometimes to discuss these things. And so that's why we do this session called Round the Table, because it's just about being able to discuss, being able to share thoughts. So we very much would like your participation in this session as well, because we want to hear what you think. We want to know what you're chewing on in relation to the topics that we bring. So if you are on Facebook, as I said before, do feel free to tag someone else into this conversation as well. I'm going to be monitoring Facebook and YouTube as well. So when you have comments or you want to share things, do bear with me. I am monitoring those, and I will highlight whatever it is that you have to say on those platforms. So with the introductions, I know that my name may say Kingdom Life Ministries, but that's not my name. My name is Vernette, and I'm going to be one of the moderators / the tech and the admin supreme for Kingdom Life Ministries. That is actually my official title here, so I'm not actually making that up. So I'm going to do my intros for the KLM core team. There's the four of us that we kind of present for Round the Table every third Sunday. So to my left, to my left is Hannah. So Hannah, say hey.
Hey everyone, welcome.
Cool. And below me is the lovely Layla. Layla, say hey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
And diagonally to me is the man, the leader, like the why fix your face. It is the apostle of the house, Darren John Joel. So Darren, say hi.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoy our discussion.
Good. Okay, so like I said, guys, really are interested in hearing what you have to say as part of the discussion. And one of the things about Round the Table as well is that we don't, it's not a scripted thing per se. We do have some points that particularly we want to steer the conversation in, but you're getting us raw and fresh here kind of thing. And so that's why it's important to us that you feel that you can say or push up what you want to say. So feel free here, feel at liberty. So let's see. So on YouTube, hello Charmaine, nice to have you. Thank you for joining us. If you are on either of those channels, again, on Facebook or YouTube, do feel free to chip in. So let's get into this today, because I feel like this is going to be a meaty one kind of thing. So I've got my water ready to go kind of thing, because it's going to be one of those. I think Hannah's got her water. Yeah, you know, it's going to be, and Layla. Yeah, Darren's going to be parched. That's fine. So let's get into this really. So the reason why we wanted to kind of hit this in terms of how is social media impacting your faith is because yes, social media has been around for many years now, but particularly since we've actually gone through this situation with the pandemic. Not sure if you realize, but there has been much more of a reliance on the internet and social media being part of the internet for our day-to-day functioning. Just as a case in point, one of the things that we did see was that there was actually an increase or a spike in people using the internet to do their shopping online, whereas previously there were some people that were not really that way inclined. You know, people still wanted to go out and do the shopping themselves, but in the pandemic we couldn't really move about as freely, and so there are certain habits, there are certain mindsets that have been developed in terms of how we interact with the world, what we rely on for our functioning, and we wanted to kind of open this out today in terms of your faith. How is social media particularly affecting you? Is it good or is it bad? So let me start by saying that the conversation is not going to be steered towards saying that social media is bad. Of course not. We could say that the internet is bad and it's not. It's more about what we use it for. So we kind of just want to be able to look at 2 points regarding this. The first thing we want to look at is, particularly for some of us and our churches, we've been engaged online even more for church services, for our faith motivation, whatever you want to call it. We're doing that all the more so now than ever before. It's actually quite unprecedented, the amount of reliance on social media that we do have when it comes to faith. So we want to kind of stir some sort of thought towards, should there be limits in terms of the consumption with regards to social media and the good content? And then also, do you recognize, or are there impacts on how we even function as believers on the day-to-day basis in light of social media? So based on that, I'm going to open it up to our panel. So anybody can kind of take that off for starters. Let me see what you got, guys. Don't rush. Are you serious, guys?
Okay, but you know what it is? I think I always go. I always go first. I was wanting to give someone else the opportunity to go first.
Okay, go ahead, go for it.
No, what was your question again?
Right. So the question was, in terms of the content that we've been consuming on social media, and when it comes to building up ourselves in faith, do you think there should be limits on that consumption?
That's a heavy question to kind of start with, because like you said in your introduction, social media has been really good during the pandemic, and the internet as well, in keeping us connected because we couldn't physically be there.
Sure.
So definitely agree with that. So there are good points to social media, big connectiveness being one of them. I think it's important to note that, it takes only I think it's 12 weeks to develop a new habit. If you do something repeatedly for over 12 weeks, it becomes a habit. And so a lot of us, because of the pandemic, have picked up habits in social media. Habits around our use of social media has changed. So for me, I would say like a good habit would be the apps. Mm-hmm. So before, people might have the only time they connected with the word might have only been on a Sunday when they went to service, while the Bible apps have now encouraged personal study. More people are reading, using the Bible apps, following the plans, and actually really, I think there's been a growth in personally reconnecting back with the word. So as Christians, I think that is good. So I think the limitation for me would be around the types of social media applications that are being used, personally. So I know that up until a couple of years ago, I used to be on one app all the time. I used to be on Facebook all the time. Any little ping, I was on it. I was on there finding out what was happening. And I think 2 years ago, I went on a social media detox or social media fast. So basically took everything off my front screen, and that was it. Taking everything off the front screen of my phone, made such an impact, because all of us, I don't know about you, but how many of us really go into our menu to search for an app? Because all the apps that we use are always under, okay, well, I don't. I had everything on the top of the screen so that it was there at the fingertip. easy for me to just disconnect. Notifications came up. So actually, it was when I did that, which was switching off my notifications, taking a lot of things apart from my email, and even WhatsApp came off. It came off because a lot of people don't realize that WhatsApp is a social media application. It made me realize how just literally that couple of weeks that I took the time out, consciously took the time out, it made me realize the amount of time that I spent on social media. So I think the limitation should be around how much time we spend on social media and what social media apps are we using and why.
Okay, cool. So then actually you said something that's quite key. Sorry, Hannah, before you jump in. So you consider WhatsApp to be a social media application?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Based on
the fact that it does things like video calls, you can send a lot of messages, you can interact on it the same way you can interact on some things on Facebook, like watching videos in the app. So something as simple as before I used to come out, when I need someone to send me a video link, I would have to, you'll click it and take me out into another app where everything is inside the app now, which is keeping it social. So yes, I wouldn't have said so. I think when WhatsApp came out, originally, it was a texting tool, and for us Africans, it was a fantastic way to get connected through the internet, over mobile data and Wi-Fi, and cost effectively cut down on the call cards.
Okay.
So it was great in connecting that way. And I personally never really thought of it as a social media tool the way I would see Twitter and Facebook. Okay. But the pandemic is a big deal. There was so much information in the first couple of weeks. Even the news outlets were telling us not to stop listening to information on WhatsApp. So WhatsApp came where everybody was getting a lot of information, a lot of fake news was being spread very quickly. So to me, it's now a social media tool.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion. But and even the way that we interact with it, it's different. People just don't use WhatsApp just for, I'm just going to send a text to someone, like would using messaging or calls. The more connectiveness, sorry, it's quite loud in my area, the more connectiveness that we know is, the more we're enabled to be connected through WhatsApp, the more is the reason why I've said yes. So I'm going to let Hannah speak because someone is blowing a horn.
Hannah, jump in.
Does that happen every Sunday?
Hannah, your thoughts, jump in.
I'm going to share my thoughts, but also to second what Elena was saying, you might hear some raindrops on my window because it's starting to rain on my side.
Honestly, you should be able to control them things, Hannah. I mean, goodness.
Right. No, just second what Leila was saying, I think, just about WhatsApp, that was quite interesting. You made that comment because I initially saw it as just like that sort of texting app tool. And I think even over the pandemic, just seeing the slight changes, even maybe just prior to like where WhatsApp have their stories, quite similar to, the Facebook and Instagram, how you can actually put your links in there. So I realized for myself, I've been using WhatsApp as almost like my social media because it's just like you've got your personal people that it's not going out on like the whole World Wide Web in the sense of like Instagram and Facebook. So yes, I second that with Instagram. And I also agree with just the time spent on social media apps. I think that's where it can become problematic for a Christian if the time usage on the response is pretty much like, okay, it becomes unhealthy habits. So for example, for myself, I know I realized maybe it was sort of like early into last year, every time I'm up in the morning, I'm just like the first thing is like, okay, let me just check my Instagram. Scrolling. Okay, I've spent like half an hour doing this first thing when I've got up. Why? Because it was almost like just mindless scrolling just because, okay, let me see. Oh, who's liked that picture? Okay, like I've just uploaded that. Let me see if anyone's put it down. 3 minutes later, let me just check again. Like, why am I? So even recognizing my own habits form just by engaging with social media being a good thing, but it was a habit that was unhealthy for myself, because that was the thing that I would go to first thing in the morning, or I spent a lot of my time on, because I was populating other bits for my business or things like that. So so I definitely agree with just time and response too, because I think a lot of people can spend a lot of time on social media. I'm sure that a lot of you had mentioned a lot of churches, and everyone's kind of, there's been a surge being online, so there's a lot of content that is going out, and you do have people that are working either in those industries, so you're having to populate to make sure that you are keeping people connected. So there's so much positive things that can come from that, as we're just putting content out, and you can spend so long just uploading one post.
Yeah.
It's been very long uploading one post, just trying to get it right. What's the right word in the caption, bringing it all together. An hour later, you're like, I still haven't posted this. So even just the time consumed in what message am I sending out there sometimes is time consuming in itself, let alone the response that you're waiting for, maybe from those, and outside of what you might personally use it for. So I do think, time and response is important for when engaging in like the different platforms. So that's kind of what I wanted to add.
Darren, I want to hear your thoughts. I do actually have some comments. Some comments have started to kick off in YouTube. But before I get to those, Darren, just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of on sort of online with your question about the time that we spend, because I think in your question you related it to a lot of what's going on with churches and consuming content online to build up your faith. So I think for me, it's not so much about time; it's more about what you're doing. Because if you're talking about consuming content to build up your faith, then that's one thing. So there are two sides to that to me. There is, number one, is the content that you're consuming actually building up your faith? Just because it's Christian, it doesn't mean you're building up your faith. It just means that it's quote unquote Christian. And I think one of the things that I think this time has brought out a lot, I know for me, is that there's a lot of content on there that's Christian, but I don't necessarily find it faith building for me. But I can tell it's been done by somebody who believes in Christ. So there is a thing about, even when going on so-called Christian content, why am I even on that? That's the question. What is the reason for me even being on that? Because you can still idle away hours on so-called Christian content that at that time may not really be adding much to you. So I think that's that side of it in terms of your question. I think outside of that, if we're talking about social media in general, should there be limitations? I mean, I think there should be. It's an interesting question, because I suppose I'd flip it the other way. What other area of life do we have where there aren't limitations? You know, I think it's more about self-discipline. Whatever it is that we're doing, you know, I enjoy sport, but and it's good for me, but I still have to limit the amount of time that I spend doing that, because there are just simply other things to do in life. So, you know, I think it's almost, and this is one point I make, sometimes we almost consider social media like this brand new area, and in a way it is, but I think there's a danger that we take social media and we put it outside of the normal boundaries that we have for life, as if it's this special thing. As opposed to actually making it subject to the way that we actually live our lives, as opposed to actually it dictating the way that we live our lives. And I think they're different. So that's what I'd say. And lastly, anything owned by Facebook is social media. I don't care if it's a pencil. If Facebook own it, if Facebook own that pencil, they found a way of tracking you, analysing you, doing what with your data. If Facebook own it like they do WhatsApp and social media, like, you know, Yeah.
So what? Facebook T-shirts? It's social media. Like what?
Listen, Mark Zuckerberg's dog. I don't care. It's social media. Like, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned something there, which actually feeds into one of the comments, and I've got Charmaine here who said that she's trying not to rant, but social media has. She just said here that social media has highlighted the lack of discipline that some people have in terms of the misinformation that is mindlessly being consumed, and as you said, Dan, you kind of used that word discipline, and I think that that's actually quite spot on, really. That if social media, the usage, I think that we can all kind of agree on that if it's actually not subject to your normal boundaries for living. If I'm going to assume that we all have sort of like reasonable boundaries in terms of how we live, but if it's not subject to that, then yes, it can sort of like become a thing. That's what we're ruled by. And I can say that because of the work that I do in my business, where I'm on the internet a lot, I get to observe a lot of things. We're seeing more and more that people are relying on social media for sometimes even life choices. And particularly for some of us as Christians, and I've seen this, that there can be even points of doctrine regarding the faith that we now, because we're more leaning on social media than even the time that we're spending in the Word, it's almost like we don't realize where social media weighs in heavier than actually what the Word says, and even your relationship with God at that. And then we've got coming back to the point about WhatsApp. So we've got Omar here who says that WhatsApp, he thinks it is social media. He says an empty box that relies on users' content and is designed to connect people with the content of other people. No, which is true, Omar. I'm gonna say because like this is my area in terms of apps and things. The primary purpose for WhatsApp is that it actually was just meant to be a messaging service. But like Darren has said, since WhatsApp is now owned by Facebook, there were all these integrations that now started to come into the WhatsApp environment. So for some of us, if you use the WhatsApp stories function, sometimes the app will ask you if you want to share your WhatsApp story on Facebook. So it's now starting to become a bit of a halfway house. And as Omar has said, yes, it's an empty box, as in if you don't put anything into it, then nobody's using it. It's there's nothing happening. But as all these app companies become owned by other people, so for example, YouTube being owned by Google, the more that you see a lot of these companies start to do their merging, is the more that you see even the purpose of a lot of these apps changing. And I think that sometimes as Christians, we're not always aware of some of these things that are going on in the background, because the companies do have their agenda. They are profit-making companies. We forget that, which is why, for example, and I'll probably touch on Charmaine's point here, in terms of sharing misinformation, we went through, a phase like years ago where, people were forwarding the fact that how WhatsApp was going to charge you a certain amount of money and apply it to your bill. And then, all of a sudden, like, we were all up in arms because, this free application is not going to be free no more. Let me forward this so I can keep this free application. And it's like, actually, guys, particularly for us as Christians, it's an application that's owned by profit-making companies. And so in terms of that side of things, I think that we forget that because of the ease of which we access these apps. And then I kind of find personally that it builds up a sense of entitlement almost, that I must be able to access this app for free. Why can I not? We don't even realize it. So just case in point, for those of us that are on Instagram, I'm sure that we've noticed that there's been like an increase in the ads. Yeah. And even the other day I was moaning. I was like, why is there so many ads on Instagram now? But then it's like, actually, if you think about it, Instagram have allowed you to sign up for free. But there's going to be ads. It's their platform, in the same way that if you go on YouTube now, even if you went on YouTube to watch a service or to listen to a worship song, and you click, oh yeah, I want to listen to that, and what's the first thing that you meet? An ad. So when you're there sort of like, in your flow with God, you're like, yeah, I just wanna, and then there's a, Monday.com, that kind of thing. So I think that sometimes we as Christians forget that these platforms, where they're allowing us to use them for free, the platforms have agendas behind them, kind of thing. What would you guys say on that?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they are not, generally speaking, non-for-profit charity organizations that are just created platforms so that you could warm your heart. They are, do you know what I mean? They are money-making devices.
Yeah.
And like with anything else, you've got to ask the question: if they're letting you sign up for free, how are they making their money?
Right.
They're making their money by having an audience. They're making their money by having data. Data is the currency of the 21st century.
Indeed.
And who owns the data starts to control the narrative.
Yeah.
And I know we're going. We are going somewhere else with this, but so it is really about, however it started off, I can't say, but the kind of people that often either start these things off or buy these things once they become successful have a 5 and a 10 and a 15-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to a point where social media, which isn't always very social in the first place, but moving on. But social media, because it has such a captive audience, because it is a place where information is disseminated so rapidly, it has the ability to control narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that when they came together, what was it? I can't remember whether it was the World Economic Forum, but they came together a couple of years ago to do their disaster planning scenario about what they would do if a pandemic broke out and a coronavirus was released around the world and caused a mass shutdown of the world. I think that was done a couple of years ago. You can still see it on YouTube. And they ran a scenario eerily similar to what we have at the moment. Staying away from it. One of the things that they had to consider, that they were considering, and you've got people from like the world's banks there, you've got people from top organizations there, you've got people from the military in those sort of planning scenarios. One of the things they had to consider is what should be done about social media.
Mm-hmm.
And that should tell you the level of influence and the level of power that social media has to control a narrative. Yeah.
No, exactly that. I think that I think that we do forget all that in the midst of the, like I said, social media provides a lot of faith believers, ministries, even us. Like, we use social media to share with, like we're using it right now, obviously, to do this this session, and there is a lot of good content. But I think that what needs to be held in tension is that there are agendas, and I just wanted to actually just say this quickly because Danny touched on it before I go to Hannah and Leila on your point, is that all these companies, they have mission statements. And if we was to look up Facebook's mission statement, Instagram's mission statement, Twitter's mission statement, they all actually say things that are quite similar. Because of what they're trying to do. So I actually went, because I'm Vernet and that's what Vernet does, I actually went to just have a quick look because, for example, Google's mission statement is just something to the effect of they want to make all the world's information accurate and accessible in one place, which would explain why I'm trying not to stray into Darren's sort of like conspiracy theorist thing here at the minute, but which is why in terms of the information that they're collecting and they're constantly telling you, is because they want to make information accessible. In terms of the limits on that's another session maybe. But when you get into like Facebook and Instagram, and just looking at my notes, Facebook's mission statement just says something like they want to give people the power to build community and to bring the world together. Instagram will tell you to capture and share the world's moments. YouTube, to give everyone a voice and to show them the world. Twitter, to give everyone the power again to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers. And so I don't know, for those of you that are maybe not on Twitter, because Twitter's quite fast paced, but Twitter particularly, it has a bent on it where it's more opinion based, where it actually invites people to dialogue and to have opinion. You can say what you want to say, be whoever you want to be, and that's accepted, because why? Twitter, I've already told you, no barriers. You can say what you want, good or bad. So I think that, again, when it does come to the fact that we are relying, and whether or not we want to see it that way, because we all have to kind of ask the question, if we're relying on social media for our hits concerning faith and our motivation concerning faith and our relationship with God, that we have to bear these things in tension sometimes with the fact that actually these platforms, they allow you to do it, but as Darren said, these platforms have not told you, that they are furthering the cause of Christ. They have not told you that they are social enterprises where they are about the community and trying to have philanthropic edges to what they do. They are actually companies where they have a bottom line and they are trying to make money at the same time. Sorry, Hannah and Layla, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
I think I was just going to add, it might be just a bit to the side, so just to kind of put it out there as well. But just some of the things that you guys are saying, and my mind was just ticking over just how much, I guess, in reflection for myself, that I use social media as almost like a short term, like this is it now, but not really that long term. So when Darren was talking about actually the plans and things are in place for actually building it because of the type of businesses or organizations that look after social media, I don't think our mind even goes that far. And when you mentioned in a previous comment that we do feel that sense of entitlement when we're putting things out there, or when we're using social media, that when things do change, it is pretty much like why is this happening? I can't tell you that I've sat down and read the mission statements of any of those. Nor the T's and C's, nor the policies behind it, but those also things, when we're thinking about business, I think that they're constantly changing and adapting to the needs, to the algorithms of those who are maybe using to content that's being shared, to what's going around the world. And I don't often sit down and do that. So I think there's also that aspect of, I guess somewhere in our conversation, maybe talk about like responsibility of not just what we put out there, but also, like we're saying, how we engage with it in regards to our faith and how God would want us to order our lives, and how we use and engage it alongside those sort of like the self-disciplines of what that means for us each day, I think, because everything's changing each day. And I think just to add as well, this is the side comment, I think, because I know recently I had been contacted by someone who had a different organization. I know someone quite well, that they had put content out on Facebook, but then after maybe 2 or 3 days, it was actually taken down. What they sent through was like the links of, kind of, was you aware of like public forums versus publishers versus, I think it's the communication decency, like there's a policy around actually how these organizations or businesses actually work together to communicate content that's being shared and how it's going out, and how that's probably changed over time. So where we talked about the cluster of, Google and YouTube and Facebook kind of attached to Instagram, but it feels like it's not quite, but there is that kind of cluster of how they're working together in similar ways, not to kind of dismiss the fact, not saying it's a negative thing, but I think for us, sometimes we don't understand that what they might have started off with, I think that you were saying, Darren, in being a public forum, so you can actually share your content. YouTube, you can upload whatever, but they take no liability for what might be uploaded. In that sense, that's kind of in place. But over time, because they're profit-making companies, they also want to be able to have control over what lines up with their mission statement, you can say, or what content is actually going out there. So effectively, that if you've got control of that, you effectively become a publisher, like a newspaper, in that sense. So you can't go to the Metro or to the Telegraph and just be like, here's my story. I saw it in a video, so it was like, here's my story. They have to go through and say what we're going to publish, what we're going to put in, what fits in with what we stand for this. No different to church, you know, where we have our mission, no different to school. You know, I'm pretty sure we've heard of the whole zero tolerance, maybe back in the day. You know, there's different things that they just wouldn't stand for. So a lot of companies want to become these sort of publishers because they want the control over it, because it is something they own, but it also want the freedom for people to speak in a public forum. And what this video was doing is basically just highlighting those two areas. And a lot of, like, you know, you can say Google or Facebook, YouTube, these social media platforms want to sit kind of in the middle, and that's a really hard place to sit. So I think through that, another policy is produced, but a lot of these things in the background we don't really know about or necessarily look up, but they're happening, you know, as to why we might go, why did my content come off? I was talking about Christ and they don't have the right to do this, but actually they do own it. Their policies probably changed. We probably haven't looked up or taken responsibility to do that, because they're only just going in line with what they stand for and what their mission statement is be. So yeah, some different things that you were saying, Darren and Vanette, it just had my mind ticking over those things that I've heard, even just over this period of the pandemic, where there's a lot more content going out. So I think a lot of companies are monitoring what that looks like. And sometimes I think as Christians, we have to be mindful of what we feel like we are entitled to, and also balance it with the discipline of actually how we're using it. Actually, what you know, is that entitlement actually overriding what we believe in, just in the foundations of our faith, and what God is saying in how we should actually live daily. Is that a big thing if your content is taken down, but you won't step outside to actually talk to someone about your faith? You know, I think, yeah, that's where my mind kind of goes. There's lots of different kind of things that's been batting around, so I'm just chucking it out there. But yeah.
Okay, Layla, on you?
I think I agree that it's that consciousness thing of these are organizations, and that they are operating for a reason, mostly for profit. But it's quite interesting that we're even saying that, because I know because of the pandemic, there's been this thing in America of cancel culture, where, you know, people have been saying, there's been a backlash, or there's a groundswell around what people are now allowed to say. So it's quite interesting that even though these that they are companies and organizations that, I don't know, in the last 5 to 6 months, there's something about the way that even social media is being used now, and people are bringing them to account, or, you know, the users of social media, these social media platforms. And I think even in I think a couple of weeks ago, there was the Americans that called in all the top big companies to kind of talk to them about, you know, just what's happened and how come their companies have grown during the pandemic. So I think there's a lot in that, where, like you said, you know, we started off the conversation around the use of social media and how we use it. And that, for me, I think I would say that we asked about limitations, but we've kind of been talking about why do you use it, what do you use it for, why, and why.
Mm-hmm.
That's important as Christians, but also I think that social media itself is changing.
Yeah.
And the responsibilities of the platforms that we all use is changing. And I think, to kind of echo what Hannah said, but then it feels like as users, we're not changing, or not saying that we're not changing, or that as users, we need to become more responsible with the what's it called, with the apps and the platforms, social media platforms that we're using.
Down on you on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think bringing this back to very much the context as Christians and our engagement with social media, I think one of the things that we always have to do, and I know it's a sort of, for some people, it's an eye roll moment, but you know what? We have to bring this back to the foundations of our faith. And the fact that before things become tangible in the physical, there is often a spiritual reality behind all of these things. So let's suspend the eye roll for a moment. But here we go. The minister's going to talk church. Yes, I am, and I don't apologize. Listen, first of all, the body of Christ is supposed to be a nation. Yeah? The Bible tells us that we are actually a nation that come from a different kingdom. And I think one of these is rather than saying, right, we are already a nation, we come from a kingdom that has a set of values, that has a set of belief, that has a set of principles. And therefore, what we are really supposed to be doing we're in the world, that we're not of it. So while we're here, we take everything that comes from the world, we look at it and we go, before we just absorb it and internalize it, you know, before we sort of just like the Borg, just assimilate. Yeah.
Yeah. Just bear with me. I think that we're back on YouTube. I hope. Let's have a look. Yeah. Okay. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to carry on. Dan, I'm so sorry because I actually interrupted you. And as we've been talking about this whole social media thing, you know, our attention span, you know, we're going to see where we are with our attention span. So I'm really so sorry, Facebook and YouTube. You know, as it would be, the day that we're talking about social media is the day when everything goes a bit upside down. So I'm really, really sorry, guys. If you can still see us on YouTube, just let me know. Facebook is not even opening very well. Yeah, okay, so let's carry on. Let's continue. Darren, do you remember your point?
I do. I do.
Okay. So once again, guys, I said really sorry on Facebook and YouTube. I am actually recording this anyway, so we'll do a replay. And so if you can't see us at the moment, then I do apologize, but I will upload this so that you can see our lovely faces later. So Darren, if you can recap on your point there that you left off of before I kind of cut you off. Sorry.
Okay, no problemo. So how far back do you want me to go? Because I said quite a lot.
Yeah, you did. So go back to the point about the when they're enlisting the sort of like the human behavioral scientists and things like that, and how they kind of tailor the platforms according to engagement and so on.
All right, rewind and come again. Right, so in summary, your favorite big tech companies and your social media providers use something which we will call persuasive design, and so they will employ psychologists, behavioral science experts. They're hired to create products basically that we want to use. They will employ mental health experts, and it's basically about using technology to change the way that human beings think and that human beings actually behave. And so the point I was making is that these social media companies are employing these people literally to change the way that we think and to change the way that we act. It's built into all of our social media companies, to the point where, as I mentioned, we had 50 psychologists actually sent a letter to the American Psychological Association because they were concerned about the impact, and they actually called them in the letter hidden manipulation techniques that are being used on these platforms to get people to engage and to stay on these platforms, which are even a cited aim of some platforms like Facebook. And although they were in this particular letter, they were looking at the effects on children. I think it applies to all of us. And from a Christian perspective, again, we have to think about this, because they are literally employing these people to change the way we think. So we're talking and act. So we're talking about the mind. So we're talking about the soul. So they are employing people to help shape your soul, which is obviously an intangible part of our being. So as Christians who come from another culture and another place, which already has a set of principles, beliefs, values, which govern the way that we think and we act, we need to be aware of these things, and aware that literally with social media, this drive to actually control the psychology of human beings, literally the neurocircuitry of human beings has been stepped up at an astonishing rate. And so if that's what these companies are doing, we have to ask what their agenda is. Because if they are remapping how you respond and what you respond to, we have to ask the questions about how that affects our responses to Christ, to the gospel, and how that even affects our ability to discern where our responses are coming from and what is governing our behavior. So that's one of the points that I would make, and I have more about that, which I will probably go into as we're going along, but I don't know if anybody else wants to come in just on that.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think it's quite interesting, your point, Darren, because I kind of noticed, I know that, I'm from a generation where we didn't have social media growing up. We didn't have smartphones growing up. I was born in an era where there's only 4 TV stations. So I think for me, there's a lot of us that it's not natural. It's not something, it's not our normality. It's a learnt behavior. And the point that it's going to feel like a tangent, but just kind of jump off what you said, is the impact that it's having on our, like you said, obviously on how we think, which is part of the soul, our mind, but also how we see, again, another aspect of our the mind is how we see ourselves. So there's a lot of identity attached to social media and what I call the online avatar of yourself. Mm-hmm. So there's you in the reality, and then there's the you, this ideal person that you've built up online, that you've built up in your mind, that's now enabled you to manifest that personality online. So, for example, Instagram, I always choose my pictures, but when we look at people and we look at lifestyles and that are being portrayed on social media platforms, I think as Christians, a lot of us are influenced by that. We're influenced, and the impact that it has on us is on identity is also definitely for females and guys as well. How we look, mm-hmm. what we think about ourselves, how desperate we value the like button. Mm-hmm. We want people to like our thoughts. We want people to like our pictures, the image that we're presenting of ourselves, which for a lot of people is not the reality. Mm-hmm. So I definitely, I do agree with you that it's all these psychological principles are being used to not only just change our minds, but our feelings as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I've heard of, I've seen it sometimes happen to me. I'll see a person, I'll get angry, I'm emotionally involved there for the next couple of hours. I'm interacting, and actually, what does that have to do with anything? Mm-hmm. Apart from the fact that it caught my eye, and then I've now wasted time on it. Again, reinforcing the habit. So yes, just to kind of add to what you were saying, Darren, that actually it's not only the psychological effects of how we use social media or how social media wants us to engage with it, it's quite profound. And as a Christian, I feel that without any firm foundations, and I've seen that a lot in young people, like a lot of people are not used, like we said at the beginning of this discussion, that it's how you use social media, but actually, psychologically something called instant gratification and the whole, chemical release when we're instantly gratified. And that is a lot of what you mentioned about a lot of the strategies being used to keep you engaged online. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Leila, because I've done a little bit of research around that, around when you talk about the chemical responses to how we use social media. And again, this is stuff that people can look up, but there's a particular chemical as part of our makeup called dopamine. Which our body makes up, and dopamine is meant to be associated with feelings of pleasure, so to speak, or something that's pleasurable to us. And there's just been studies around the fact that actually they did this study more in relation to young people, because obviously, young people in tech and social media, there's direct correlations there. But I think, again, we're talking in the context of everyone. Everyone uses social media and is being affected or impacted in some way. But some of the studies will show that some of us are in dopamine loops, and what that basically means is that it's that feeling that when you put something out there, you're waiting for that instant gratification, that has someone responded to my post, has someone responded to my expression. And when you do then check in, then the dopamine loop starts, where then you continue to kind of seek for more instances of that instant gratification. So it kind of keeps you in that space. So it all kind of ties in with some of the stuff that Dan was talking about with the human behavioral aspects to it. And again, about forming even just our understanding of what image is and what life is. And I think that actually, and that brings me on to the next point then, is that is social media impacting how we interact or how we behave on a daily basis when it comes to who we are as Christians? So to kind of give a bit more of a clarity to that question, something that I've noticed is that I find that more so now, as much as we have all of these platforms and, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even YouTube, they will kind of tell you it's about bringing the world together, about heightening connectivity, about being able to share. But we seem to be more in a time where people are at their loneliest and don't know how to form healthy relationships or healthy relating patterns, even though social media would tell you from the mission statements that that's what they're here to promote, for everybody to feel included. And so when we look from a biblical point of view, I will kind of just chip in and add my opinion on this now, is that I think that that's also some of the reasons as to why, when it comes to modeling the whole concept of Christian family, I think that this is an area where we struggle because of the way that we have been used to consuming maybe Christian content to a degree online, and all those associated bits around the dopamine and the instant gratification. And someone else also commented on YouTube to say, what about the addictive elements of social media? So I think that my question I would push back is that, do we see that there has been effects on how we as Christians interact with each other, even just according to sort of like biblical framework?
Okay, I was waiting for someone else to unmute, but fine, I'll keep going. I think I look at that by coming back to kind of some of the points I was making, because I've got some bits here that talk about internet addiction, or what we call digital dependence, which talks about individuals who find it difficult to put aside connections with smart devices and suffer all sorts of withdrawal symptoms, psychological and physical. So that is a real thing, comparable to all other types of addiction. So that is all in there. So talking about all of that, and just to draw on what you were saying, so there has been a study apparently done by Columbia University that shows that there is impact on the brain and memory function from prolonged social media use, and that it actually harms the ability to form long-term memories. And obviously that when information is readily available online, we're less likely to form a long-term memory of that information. And that they think that one of the areas that may suffer most damage is the prefrontal cortex at the front of the brain, which is connected to higher functioning. There's things like our ability to plan, motivation, the selection and encoding of memories, to the point where they're finding that millennials actually have a harder time encoding and remembering information than seniors. Not even just older people, but seniors. So it also affects our ability to control impulses. So now remember, as Christian people, putting that in a Christian context and talking about affecting our ability to encode memories, according to Psalm 119, David talks about hiding the word in his heart that he might not sin against God, and we can't remember stuff because we're on social media all day. We talk about the ability to control our impulses is being affected because we're used to interacting with interfaces that are all about giving us gratification and hits and rewarding impulsive behavior. But yet we're supposed to be people that have crucified the flesh and are not living according to the dictates of our senses and our reasoning and our emotions, minus the influence of the Holy Spirit. So I think we can certainly see how these things may have an effect on our functioning when the Bible's telling us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And social media is telling you the same thing, be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So it's not a question of whether or not our minds are being renewed, it's who's renewing them. Is it the person that owns Facebook, Snapchat, Insta, or is it the Word of God? Depending on where we're spending our time. So to me, it's like social media can now actually become a competing force, literally an unseen competing force, which makes it spiritual in my book, a competing force with the Spirit of God in terms of how we as believers function. And so surely that has to affect our interaction with God and our interaction with each other, would be my thing. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
I was just going to add to that. I think I think we can't dismiss in all of that also just the choice that people make, as much as like the behaviors and the bombardment on our soul is kind of in play when we're engaging in social media, but we still make the choice to either choose, am I going to engage with God right now, or am I going to engage in whatever social media habits that we might have formed too. So as you're talking, that's one of the things that could come to mind was actually, the choice in what we choose to depend on or rely on as Christians when it comes to engaging with God, whether that's Christian content online or actually just going directly to God and that's spending that time. But also, I think you did pick up a really good thing around like the behaviors. We notice it a lot, I think, especially when we're maybe talking to different people, and we might even just say, actually, you want things too instant, they're saying, click a button, you've got it, you've got to work if you need money, so even just those fundamentals or those basic things that, Lady was saying that you wasn't kind of like, you didn't grow up in the social media age in that sense, or the digital age in that sense. But I think as we're seeing now a lot, there is that the behaviors of wanting things instantly and the demand and that entitlement and so as much as we've been talking about like the soul and the mind and how it's shaped our will and our emotions, I can see how those behaviors also have played out in different areas, especially within just working with young people within my profession. It's just surged that sometimes you're like, wait, hold on, this should be common sense, A is B, you know, and you probably find yourself, I don't know, I find myself talking a lot about maybe basic things or things that I thought would have been common sense, but because of that, those new pathways that had been made in mind, and like you had been saying, Darren and Vanette, it's now created a whole different pathway for people to go down, I think, as well. I don't know if I'm making sense there. Like I'm still forming my thoughts. But Darren, you had mentioned, yeah, so Romans 12:2, it talks about, you know, not conform to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But you made a really good point there in saying, actually, how are you, your mind is being renewed, but where? You know, that word still stands as itself. And you cannot renew your mind in a godly way without God. So whether you're renewing your mind in other places, or you're creating those pathways or forming those neurological kind of connections, I think that's also a really good point to highlight. As Christians, actually, those things are still, we're not exempt from that. We're still human. Everybody's human. We're still forming. The difference is actually, are we allowing, is Holy Spirit, is God center of that? Is he core to that? Is, like Leah had said, is he the firm foundation? Do we understand that and are building our faith based on that, and not based on maybe the false areas that we don't often think about when it comes to our soul? Yeah, I'm still ticking everything, so I just want to jump in.
Yeah, I think like you say, I think that one of the points that was in my mind as well, and you know, like with Darren, when you talked about, you know, not being able to remember stuff, you know, I mean, I'm finding for myself, because I'm online a lot, and I think just generally by personality, I can be someone who can be quite impatient sometimes. Like, I need things clicking and moving, you know. But I've even found that, you know, for myself, I'm really having to take the time to do things in a certain way where I don't become over dependent on a lot of the online tools that I use, which I have to use in order for me to be able to function the way that I do. But just being able to see the impacts on that, when there's just so much information, that you're not getting the opportunity to think things through to their logical conclusion. So, like you said, Hannah, when you're talking to people and you think, yeah, well, that should be common sense, because if you actually thought that through another couple of steps, then the results should have been obvious. But it's not necessarily. I'm noticing that it's that's not always as apparent sometimes, I find. But particularly with the relating thing, I think one of the things that I feel is that I think that social media is good, in terms of reinforcing, biblical virtues and principles. But one of the things I think where we probably need to pay attention is particularly around what the church family is actually meant to be. Because the issue I think that we have as well is that, in terms of, like, just even in the Bible, where it just talks about loving one another intensely,